All right, I'm going over the quiz here, and anytime that I'm going over things, it's always a good idea for you, the learner, to try it on your own. Pause the video. I build in prompts too in this video to help you pause it as well, but when you pause it, that allows you to think, and now you can be more interested when I go over the answer, and also you don't fall into the trap of being in TV mode where you're just kind of watching, and it's looking a lot easier than in reality it is when you actually try it yourself. So this first one, we have to apply the distributive property. And when we do that, all that means is that whatever is outside of parentheses is multiplying what's inside the parentheses. So in this particular instance, I would do negative 6 times x, which is just negative 6x. And then this part's tricky. Negative 6 times, I treat that as a negative 5. So a negative times a negative is a positive, so it would be positive 30. And that's all you can do. You can't combine these because they're not like terms. Remember, the directions just said rewrite the expression. It's not like you can solve the value of x here because it's an expression. You can only solve for x if it's an equation or if you happen to know what x is. Numbers 2 and 3, you're finding the sum by combining like terms. You can see here it's a positive and a negative. Anytime you're adding positive and negatives, you take a look at what you have more of. Do you have more positives or more negatives? Well, you have more positives, and that's an indication that the answer will be positive. I have, it looks like 5 more positives than negatives. You could really treat this as 7 minus 2. So this will be equal to 5. Notice in this one right here when we multiplied, the rules are a little different than when you add. If you happen to be multiplying a positive and a negative, it will always equal a negative. When you add and subtract, and I'll get to that a little bit more down here, it really depends. So here, it looks like we have coefficients in front of the x's. Are there more negatives or more positive x's? I would say more negatives. And it looks like there's 2 more negatives, so I would say the answer to this is negative 2x. When adding a negative and a positive, what determines if the sign will be positive or negative? So if you use this example, that would certainly be an example where the positives are more than the negatives. So the way that we phrase this in mathematics, and I'm not going to get too in depth with it, but we just say whatever number has more absolute value is the sign of the sum. And so in this particular instance, 7's absolute value is 7. It's 7 spots away from 0, whereas negative 2 is only 2 spots away from 0. If we turn this around and we made it negative 7 plus 2, well then the sign would be negative because negative 7 is 7 spots away from 0 and positive 2 is only 2 spots away. So this would equal negative 5. So it really depends on the absolute value. What students say all the time is that you take the greater number. In this particular instance, the greater number is positive 2, so you wouldn't take the sign of the positive number even though it's greater than negative 7. And I think students mean that 7's absolute value is greater, but you have to say absolute value is part of that answer. For number 5 right here, it says an equation is incorrectly solved below. So what's the first step that shows an error? Well, you'll note that the only thing that changed from the original equation is this minus 3 and then this minus 3 right here. This is perfectly okay because whatever you're doing to the left side of the equal sign, you're also doing on the right side. So I think step 1 is good. Negative 4 minus 3, if I did, going back to that last one, if I did negative 4 plus 3, remember for taking the sign, whatever number has more absolute value is what we take into consideration. Well, this instance we're not adding, we're subtracting. So if it was a plus 3, it would be negative 1, but it's not a plus 3. It's a minus 3. So going back to adding the opposite, this really means if we're adding and the opposite of 3 is negative 3, this number right here should have been a negative 7. So that's incorrect. I would say step 2. I mean, your other steps are going to be thrown off because of that, but they said what is the first step that shows an error?